She only came in for concealer. But moments later, Imani Carter found herself cornered, accused, and humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers by a store manager who claimed to have seen it all. No one listened. No one questioned him. The CCTV cameras were rolling, but the truth? That would have to wait. What happened next turned a routine shopping trip into a national conversation and exposed a system that thrives on silent compliance. But before the CCTV footage rolled back, something happened that no one was prepared for. The hiss of the perfume mist still hung in the air, suspended like accusation itself, unsettled, unwanted, inescapable. Imani Carter stood beneath the harsh fluorescence of the cosmetics section, its sterile white light casting no shadow, offering no refuge. Shelves glistened with overpriced serums and lipsticks arranged like trophies of women they were never made for. The floor tiles, cold and polished to a mirrored finish, reflected her sneakers, clean, worn, practical, and the hem of her soft yellow sundress, the one her mother had sewn last spring. A gift to remind her that joy, too, could be stitched together with enough patience. She didn't hear him approach. The voice came before the man. "You gonna hand that over? Or do I need to call someone?" At first, she thought it was a joke, some misunderstanding. She turned slightly, eyebrows raised in confusion, only to meet the smug, tight-lipped expression of Brent Callahan, store manager, king of this artificially scented kingdom. His pressed white shirt strained slightly at the stomach. The thin strip of his red tie curled like a snake too tired to strike. Behind him, two young white employees hovered with awkward tension, eyes darting from her to Brent like birds watching a storm cloud gather. "I'm sorry," Imani said softly, her voice carefully neutral, still giving the moment grace. "You heard me," Brent said, louder this time. "You think you're slick? Slipping that in your bag?" He jabbed a finger toward her shoulder tote. "I saw it. I watched you." Her mouth opened, closed, a silent stammer. Her heart began to pound, not from guilt, but from the sudden suffocating weight of visibility. People turned. A blonde woman at the lipstick counter stopped dabbing gloss on her wrist. An elderly white man in a golf cap leaned around a display rack. "I haven't stolen anything," Imani replied, the words trembling, not from fear, but the terrible knowledge of how many times they'd been spoken before, by someone who still lost everything. Brent stepped forward, too close. "Then you won't mind showing us, will you?" The silence in the store shifted. It was no longer stillness. It was the crackle of something waiting to ignite. Imani took a breath, then slowly unzipped her bag. One by one, she pulled out her items, a novel bent at the corners, a zippered pouch with tampons, a phone charger, a half-eaten protein bar, her student ID, her keys, no concealer, no makeup at all. Brent stared, and for a beat, it looked like the moment might crack under its own shame. But shame, Imani knew, never stuck to men like Brent. It slithered off, found someone soft to cling to, someone like her. "You must have ditched it," he said. "You were standing right here for 15 minutes. Security saw you." "Call them," Imani said, now with a defiant edge. Her hands had started to shake, but she forced her voice steady. "Run the cameras." "Already done," Brent said. "We've got it on playback. They're checking now." A lie. She saw it in the slight hesitation in his eyes, but it didn't matter. His voice had already become the truth in the ears of those watching. And now a security guard, a thick-armed man with cropped blonde hair, emerged from a side corridor whispering something into Brent's ear. Brent's smirk widened. "You're coming with us." She stepped back. "I didn't do anything." The crowd had grown, not a mob, mob's act. This was a congregation of cowards. Women in athleisure with shopping bags clutched tighter, teenagers recording with half-lowered phones, a toddler asking too loudly, "Mommy, what's wrong with that lady?" Brent's voice lowered, feigning patience. "We can do this quietly, or we can do it your way." Imani's throat was dry. Every part of her screamed to run, but not out of guilt, out of memory, out of centuries. But she knew better. She had lived in the belly of this country long enough to know what running cost. "I'll go," she said. And even as she said it, she hated the words. Not because they were weak, but because they tasted like survival. As the security guard took her elbow, not rough but not gentle, she looked down at the floor. Not in submission, but to catch her breath. On the slick tile was a single drop of pink foundation, dried and smudged. Someone else's stain, someone else's crime. And she knew, with a sudden, cruel clarity, that even if they found the footage, even if it exonerated her, the damage had already been done. They led her past rows of curious eyes. A man muttered figures under his breath. A woman clutched her purse tighter, though Imani's hands were open, empty, clean. As they neared the back hallway, Imani caught a glimpse of herself in a mirrored display. Her reflection looked small, too still, but in her eyes there was fire. Brent leaned in as they reached the door marked "Staff Only." "I hope this teaches you something," he whispered. And Imani, chin lifted just slightly, replied without blinking, "It already has." The hallway swallowed them. The back hallway was a corridor of fluorescent purgatory, long, narrow, echoing. The walls were lined with outdated safety posters and faded staff notices, their corners curling like secrets no one bothered to remember. Imani walked stiffly, each step echoing like a verdict behind her. The security guard still had her elbow, though his grip had loosened now that they were out of sight. Control didn't need to be physical anymore. The cameras watched. The walls listened. They reached a gray door near the end of the corridor. Brent unlocked it with an access card, his hands shaking with self-importance. He pushed the door open and gestured inside. "After you." Imani entered the room. It was cold. Not metaphorically, but deeply, practically cold. Like an industrial fridge someone had tried to dress up with an office chair and a dusty two-way mirror. A single desk sat in the middle, with a cheap plastic tray of expired granola bars and a blinking monitor that hummed like an anxious insect. The walls were bare, save for a fire evacuation map. Two folding chairs waited in the corner. One of them still held the imprint of someone else's weight. "Sit," Brent ordered. She didn't move. Not right away. He frowned. "I said sit." "I heard you," Imani said, and took the chair herself, without asking permission. Her knees locked tight, hands folded over the bag that still hung limply from her shoulder. Brent leaned against the desk, arms crossed. The guard stood near the door, half interested now that the show was over. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled. A woman laughed, thin, sharp, the sounds of normalcy just beyond the borders of her dehumanization. "We're waiting for the playback," Brent said. "Once security confirms what we saw, you'll be charged. Police are already on their way." "I didn't take anything," Imani said, slower now. There was no more begging in it. Just fact. Brent snorted. "You think this is new? You think I haven't seen 100 like you playing innocent until the cuffs are on?" The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the chair. 100 like me? He didn't flinch. Don't start. You know what I mean. No, she said. Say it. For a moment, the air between them buzzed with unspoken filth, and in that silence, the camera in the upper corner of the room blinked a red dot, quietly recording. You're making this harder on yourself, Brent muttered. A sharp knock on the door broke the standoff. The guard opened it. A second security officer stepped in, tall, freckled, mid-20s, with a phone in hand and a look that flickered briefly to Imani before quickly avoiding eye contact. The footage is up, he said, directing his words to Brent. You might want to look. Brent's jaw flexed. Bring it in. No, I mean, it's already rolling, at the front desk, and? There's nothing. I mean, she didn't take anything. The room stilled. Brent pushed himself off the desk. That's not possible. I checked it twice, the guard said. You can see her browsing. She puts one back. She doesn't pocket anything. She even lifts her bag to show the staff member the inside. It's clean. The other guard shifted, uncomfortable now. Brent blinked once. Then she must have ditched it. The younger man frowned. Sir, we would have seen that. Brent waved him off, grabbing his phone. This is a misunderstanding. She was acting suspicious. That's probable cause. We're allowed to detain under store policy. We'll let the police sort it out. Imani rose. So even after you see the truth, I still don't get to leave? Brent didn't respond. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate. You humiliated me, searched me, called the cops. You tore through my things. And now you're going to pretend this is just protocol? His eyes met hers, and in that moment, there was something almost fragile in his certainty, as if he hadn't expected the story to veer off script. I'm calling my lawyer, she said. Brent smirked. Good luck affording one. I don't need luck, Imani said. I need your badge number, your full name, and a copy of that footage. The door opened again, this time with urgency. A middle-aged woman in a department badge entered, short-haired, holding a printed form. Brent, I just got off the phone with corporate. There's already tweets going viral. Someone posted video of her being walked out. You need to... She stopped when she saw Imani. The apology didn't come. Not yet, just a look, thin, troubled, businesslike. Brent paled slightly. We're handling it. No, Imani said. You're not. She walked toward the door. No one stopped her. Not the guards. Not the assistant manager. Not Brent. She reached for the handle, then turned back, her voice quiet but strong. You should have rolled back the cameras before you rolled up your accusations. And with that, she stepped out into the hall, leaving their silence behind her like a storm receding. The hallway outside the holding room was quieter now, but the silence was not peace. It was the eerie vacuum left behind after a public shaming, the way noise disappears just before a verdict falls. Imani walked with her chin held firm, though the tightness in her chest pulsed like a wound still bleeding beneath clean skin. Each step she took down the corridor felt like it echoed longer than it should, as if the floor were replaying the sound of her retreat for anyone listening. She didn't make it far. Ma'am, the voice said, sharp and rehearsed, as two uniformed security guards, different from before, both white, both suddenly very formal, moved into her path. One held a clipboard, the other adjusted his radio. Their smiles were tight, corporate curated, and devoid of any warmth. We need to ask you to remain in the building until the responding officers arrive, the taller one said. Just for documentation, standard procedure. Imani looked from one to the other. "You just admitted I didn't steal anything." "Yes," the shorter one nodded. "But now that the police are en route, it's out of our hands. You're still involved in a report." "I'm not involved," she said, her voice steady. "I was falsely accused. That's not the same." They said nothing. The taller one gestured gently toward the hallway she had just escaped. "Please, ma'am." She considered, just for a second, pushing past them, just walking out. But she didn't. Not because she was afraid of running, but because she'd learned long ago that a black woman walking away from white authority was never just leaving. It was resisting. And resistance, even the quiet kind, always cost more than it gave back. So she turned, with the kind of grace that comes from a lifetime of being watched, and re-entered the cold room. The door clicked behind her like the seal of a tomb. She sat again in the same chair. Brent was gone now, replaced by another manager she hadn't seen before, a broad-shouldered man with thinning blonde hair and the bland, professional cruelty of someone trained to deny empathy with a smile. He introduced himself as Mr. Langley, just overseeing things until the officers arrive. He did not offer her water. He did not ask if she needed a phone call. He simply sat on the other side of the desk and typed something on a laptop, ignoring her except when checking the time. The minutes dragged. The room's air was filtered, too dry, humming with mechanical indifference. The walls had no windows. There were no clocks. Time hung stagnant, like dust that never settled. Imani's hands stayed in her lap, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her bag's strap over and over again. The gesture was quiet, almost invisible, but it was the only movement she could claim as hers. She tried not to think of her mother, who was probably pacing at home, wondering why Imani hadn't answered her last message. "Pick up eggs on your way back." She imagined the blue glow of her phone lighting up again and again, her mother's voice shifting from mild annoyance to worry to dread. "Excuse me," Imani said at last. "I'd like to make a phone call." Langley didn't even look up. "You'll be able to speak with the officers when they arrive." "I didn't ask about the officers. I asked for a phone." He paused, sighed. "I'll see what I can do." But he didn't move. And that's when she realized this wasn't incompetence. It was punishment. Soft, sanctioned punishment. Not for stealing, but for embarrassing them. For having the audacity to be right. For not crying. For standing up. They couldn't keep the lie. So now they'd make the truth unbearable. Somewhere behind the wall, a low whir began. A security monitor flickered to life above the desk, showing the store's entryway. People moved like ants, slow, faceless, harmless. A digital timestamp blinked in the corner. Another 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. This time it was someone new. A man with thick-framed glasses and a pale, pock-marked face. He looked too young to be anything official, but he held his phone up slightly as he entered, angling the camera toward her. "What are you doing?" Imani asked, startled. He grinned. "Corporate says we document everything now." "Put your phone down." "Ma'am," Langley interjected, "we're within policy to record interactions for liability. No audio, just video." Imani turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the camera. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes burned. She said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because every second she held that gaze, unmoving, was a statement in itself. Let them record. Let them keep their evidence. She would remember everything without needing playback. The man eventually lowered his phone, uncomfortable. He mumbled something and exited. Langley stood. Police are 5 minutes out." "Wonderful," Imani said. Her voice was flat. She waited. The door remained closed. The walls didn't move. Her knees ached. Her phone buzzed once in her bag, and she wasn't allowed to check it. She leaned back and stared at the ceiling, tracing the water-stained tile that sagged slightly near the vent. She imagined it caving in just once to startle them all. Then she thought of her mother again, of how she used to braid Imani's hair before church, murmuring scripture under her breath, with each strand twisted into place. Of how she had taught Imani to speak clearly when accused, to never raise her voice, to never run, to survive the confrontation, because it was never the fight that killed you, it was the reaction. And yet here she was, being quiet, being still, being good. And still, she was waiting for cops. The buzz of the vent grew louder, and Imani didn't flinch when the door finally opened again. But her heart did. 2 white male officers entered, both mid-40s, both with the blank efficiency of men who'd done this too many times to feel anything anymore. "Miss Carter?" the first one asked. She nodded. "You're being detained under suspicion of theft and obstruction. We'll need you to stand and place your hands where we can see them." Langley handed them a printed report. A box of her emptied belongings sat on the desk. "I was already cleared," Imani said. "That's not what this report says," the second officer replied. "We'll sort it out at the station." She looked at the 2 of them, then at Langley, whose eyes avoided hers, then back at the officers. "Do you need to cuff me?" she asked. The first one hesitated. "Just procedure." She rose, her knees cracked. She didn't resist when the cold metal clamped around her wrists. She didn't flinch as they led her toward the hallway again. She didn't speak, but her silence wasn't surrender. It was a choice. As they stepped into the corridor, she saw a reflection again, this time in the narrow metal panel of an electrical box. Her face looked tired, older, but her eyes were still steady. The last thing she saw before the door shut behind her was the red light of the security camera still blinking, always watching, always recording, never protecting. The back service door groaned open with a mechanical wheeze, releasing Imani into a world changed by light. The sun had begun to set, bleeding streaks of rust and copper across the sky, and the air held that transitional stillness when heat dies, but the memory of it clings to skin. It might have been beautiful if not for the red and blue lights slicing through it, pulsing against the store's beige exterior like open wounds blinking in time. The parking lot was partially full, the after-work crowd trickling in. People stood by their cars. A few passers-by had stopped altogether. Some filmed. Some didn't bother pretending not to stare. And in the middle of it, Imani Carter, wrists cuffed, arms held gently but firmly by the 2 white officers, walked out of the service hallway like a criminal ushered from backstage. The first voice she heard wasn't one of authority. It was a woman's voice, sharp, high-pitched, tinged with that poisonous mix of pity and disdain. Must have caught her red-handed. Another voice, a low male mutter, always playing the victim afterward. Imani didn't look at them. She focused on the pavement beneath her shoes, the cracks spidering out like veins, a dropped receipt crumpled under a tire, the flickering of a broken lamppost stuttering overhead. Every detail sharp, too sharp, like her mind had turned up the exposure on the moment to keep it from swallowing her whole. Behind her, the security guard from earlier watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his mouth a thin line. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the satisfaction of process. The machine had moved. He had done his part. "Watch your step," one of the officers said, as if they cared. She climbed into the back seat of the cruiser, her movements limited by the cuffs. The vinyl seat was warm from the day's heat. It stuck to her arms. The door shut behind her with a sound that felt too final, like something being sealed. No one spoke for the first minute. The engine idled. The front windows were down. One officer scribbled on a clipboard. The other scrolled on his phone. Then came the voice from the walkie-talkie. "Unit 3, be advised. Subject from the Capitol View department store is non-violent. No outstanding warrants, no record." A pause. The driver glanced back through the rearview mirror. Their eyes met. He said nothing. She turned her face toward the window. The sunset reflected in the store's front glass, turning the rows of beauty counters and mannequins into surreal silhouettes. The doors still opened and closed, like nothing had happened. A child clutched their mother's hand and stared as they passed the cruiser. A teenage boy in a hoodie raised his phone discreetly to record her. She heard the soft buzz of the video starting. She didn't ask him to stop, and then the memory arrived. Sudden, crude, uninvited. It was 10 years ago. She was 12. Her cousin Marcus had been arrested in front of their grandmother's house. Mistaken identity, the officer said. Slammed against a cruiser just like this one. Same cuffs, same performance. She'd watched from the porch, her popsicle melting down her arm, hearing her aunt scream Marcus's name like it was a lifeline fraying in real time. She'd asked her mother that night, why didn't they listen? And her mother had answered, voice hollow, "Baby, they don't listen to people they've already decided are guilty." Back in the present, Imani blinked once. The heat in her chest began to rise again, but it wasn't panic this time. It was rage. Pure, clean, blistering rage, pulsing underneath the numbness like blood rediscovering its path. The officer driving finally spoke. "We'll take you to Central. It's just holding. If you cooperate, you'll be out tonight." She didn't reply. Not out of defiance, but because every word they offered now felt like a curtain draped over rot. There were no explanations she needed from them. She'd already lived the answers. As the cruiser pulled out of the lot, a sudden motion in the crowd caught her eye. A middle-aged black woman, tall, silver-braided hair, blazer over jeans, was recording. Her eyes locked with Imani's through the car window. No words, just a look. Fierce, knowing. Not pity, not sadness. Just a kind of electric solidarity that cracked open something in Imani's chest. It said, "I see you, you are not alone." Imani held that gaze until the car turned and the store disappeared from view. The silence inside the vehicle thickened. The radio crackled. The city's evening hum began to rise. Distant horns, barking dogs, tires over hot asphalt. She looked down at her hands, cuffed in her lap, and whispered, not to the officers, not to herself, but to something deeper. This isn't where my story ends. The sky outside the window blazed a deep orange now, like fire behind bars, and the car drove on. The precinct reeked of disinfectant and recycled despair. The moment Imani stepped through its doors, she felt her name begin to dissolve, replaced by gestures, glances, numbers on a clipboard. A tired-looking officer in a beige uniform told her to remove her jewelry, then pointed to a bin as if she were surrendering weapons rather than earrings and a silver bracelet, engraved with grace in the fire. The cuff removal was swift, cold hands snapping metal from skin, but the imprint lingered, red and stinging, around both wrists. No one looked her in the eye. It wasn't hate, it was worse. It was detachment. the polished routine of a system too used to eating people to bother chewing anymore. Step forward, chin down. A camera flash burst without warning. The light left spots across her vision, like ghosts of herself scattered on the walls. A silent officer handed her a form with boxes she didn't want to fill in. Name, birth date, address. No one asked if she understood. No one asked if she needed to call someone. She asked. They said later. She didn't ask again. Fingerprinting came next. A woman with thin lips pressed Imani's fingers into the ink pad, like she was handling something both fragile and disposable. Her touch was mechanical, intimate and uncaring, like a doctor palpating a corpse. When it was over, they led her down a narrow corridor, floor waxed, walls too white, humming fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, like flies trapped in glass. The silence between footsteps grew longer. The other women's voices, barely audible from distant cells, echoed like warnings passed from throat to throat. The air was thick with bleach, with boredom, with something else that smelled like sleep never fully earned. Her cell was the third on the right. Steel bars, cold bench, stainless steel toilet in the corner with no lid. A single blanket folded like a mockery of comfort on the cot. It was colder here, as if dignity had been stripped from the room like heat. Lights go dim at midnight, the guard said. Yell if you need something, or don't. He walked away. Imani sat. There was another woman already in the cell. A tall, gaunt black woman with short salt and pepper hair and cheekbones carved sharp from years, not beauty. She sat cross-legged on the cot, back straight, hands resting in her lap like a statue that had seen every century pass. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. They sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Finally, the woman spoke. First time? Imani nodded. Yeah. The woman gave a low hum. You blinked too much. That's how I knew. Imani almost smiled. Almost. Do you come here often? She asked, instantly regretting how that sounded. But the woman didn't take offense. She chuckled, a dry sound like paper tearing. Enough to know the walls, not enough to belong. Another pause. Then, what they get you for? Stealing, Imani said. Except I didn't. The woman nodded, unsurprised. They ever show the footage? Didn't matter. They'd already called the cops. The woman looked at her, not with pity, but with a quiet kind of mourning. They don't need proof, baby. Just a reason. Imani looked down at her hands. They still smelled faintly of the store, perfume and fear. I feel like I left my body back there, she murmured, like I'm watching myself from outside. That's how they do it, the woman said. They don't just arrest you. They pull you out of your own skin, then expect you to explain what you're feeling in a language they don't even believe you can speak. Imani swallowed. The bench beneath her felt colder now. They sat again in silence. After a while, the lights dimmed, and the humming softened to a low throb. Imani curled onto the bench, blanket draped over her legs. She stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster like stars. Her mind wandered, back to the childhood church, where she and her mother used to sit in the second pew. Her mother always whispered one phrase during the final hymn, every week, like a mantra meant only for Imani. You are not what they see. Not what they see. Not a thief. Not a problem. Not a stereotype wrapped in skin. Her body began to shake, not from cold, but from release. The kind that comes only when silence makes space for grief. Her breath caught in her chest. Her eyes burned, but the tears did not fall. She would not give this place the satisfaction of moisture. She turned on her side and watched the other woman sleep, peaceful, as if even the steel couldn't touch her in that moment. And then, in the stillness, Imani whispered her mother's phrase aloud. "You are not what they see." It came out cracked, but it came out. She closed her eyes. Somewhere deep in her chest, the fire that had almost died sparked again. Small, but alive. Morning arrived without light. The holding cell's flickering fluorescent buzzed back to life at 5:47 a.m., announcing the new day not with warmth, but with the dull finality of a factory whistle. Imani blinked awake, her body stiff from the unforgiving bench, her mouth dry, her eyes gritty. Sleep hadn't come, just fragments of memory stitched between moments of panic and prayer. She'd kept her back to the wall all night, one eye half open, the other woman in the cell snoring softly across from her, like someone unafraid of what the system could still take. Now they came for her. A guard called her name, mispronouncing it, of course, and opened the door with a metallic groan. No one said where they were going. They didn't need to. The moment she was led through the hallway past others still curled under itchy blankets, she knew. Court. She was handed her clothes, creased from where they'd been stuffed into a plastic bin, and given 5 minutes in a small, windowless room to change. The fabric of her sundress felt foreign now, clinging to skin that no longer trusted comfort. She pulled it over her head slowly, fingers numb. By the time they loaded her onto the transport van, her sense of time had unraveled. The ride to the courthouse was short, but stretched long inside her mind. Her wrists were cuffed again, this time linked to a chain at her waist. She sat among other women in various states of disrepair, some asleep, some staring blankly, one whispering a hymn beneath her breath like a lullaby to a forgotten god. The courthouse was cold, too polished, too bright. The marble floor swallowed footsteps like secrets. Officers walked briskly with clipboards, earpieces, and smug detachment. She was shuffled into a narrow hallway lined with benches. The door to courtroom 4B loomed ahead. An officer opened it. The room was full. Rows of spectators, some dressed for court, others for curiosity. The hum of whispered conversations under high ceilings gave the air a restless quality, like everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. And at the center of it all sat the judge. Judge Frederick Ellison, white, mid-60s, balding, with the kind of face that looked like it hadn't changed expression in 20 years. He adjusted his glasses without looking up. His robe hung stiffly from his shoulders, and when he finally lifted his gaze, it was not to see her, but to locate the file someone handed him. Imani was led to the defense podium. She stood alone. No attorney, no advocate, just her breath, and the throb in her wrists. The bailiff's voice rang out. Case number 2467, People vs. Imani Carter. Charge, suspected petty theft and obstruction of store investigation. Defendant is present and unrepresented at initial appearance. The prosecutor stood. A white man in a navy suit, hair slicked, voice polished and disingenuously polite. Your Honor, this is a standard matter, but the facts suggest a troubling pattern. The defendant was combative during detainment, refused to comply with store policy, and has not provided verification of employment or student status. Imani's eyebrows twitched. That was a lie. She'd offered her student ID. They'd ignored it. We recommend bail be set at $5,000, the prosecutor continued, given the potential for flight and the refusal to provide documentation. Is that accurate? The judge asked, flipping through the report without reading it. Imani stepped forward, her voice dry but measured. I gave them my student ID. It's in the property bag. I wasn't combative. I asked to call my mother. They wouldn't let me. The judge looked at her then, briefly, just enough to register that she was articulate, just enough to categorize her as defensive. "You're not represented by counsel?" he asked. "I wasn't given a phone call," she said. He tapped the file once against the bench. Noted. Bail set at $5,000. Next case. A crack opened in her chest. "Your Honor, I can't," she began. "You'll have an opportunity to resolve this with counsel at arraignment," he said, already shifting to the next folder. "I didn't do anything." His gavel hit the wood. "Next case," he repeated. She didn't move. Not immediately. Her hands trembled at her sides. In the audience, a sudden movement caught her eye. Third row, end seat. Her mother. She was there. Maya Carter, dressed in a plain blouse and slacks, her hair wrapped in a neat scarf, eyes lined with exhaustion. She didn't cry. She didn't mouth anything. She just looked at Imani with the kind of look only a mother can give. A mix of fear, pride, fury, and apology for not being able to shield her daughter from the storm. The bailiff touched Imani's arm. She turned. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, the murmurs resumed. The judge was already deep into the next case. No one remembered her name. No one remembered what had been said. But Imani would remember everything. The cold, the lie, the price of speaking plainly. As she was led back down the hall toward the holding area, her mother's face stayed with her, etched into the backs of her eyelids. And when she closed her eyes, she heard her own voice again, quiet, from that still part of her that had not yet surrendered. "I didn't do anything." And the system replied, as it always did, without blinking. "Doesn't matter." The holding area smelled like rust and tired breath. The cinder block walls, pale green and scuffed, gave the illusion of care. But everything about the space whispered, "You are not meant to stay clean in here." Imani sat on a wooden bench, her hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes fixed on the opposite wall where the paint bubbled like old skin. She had stopped trying to make sense of time. There were no clocks, and the rhythm of things was dictated by the erratic procession of guards barking names and ushering women to courtrooms, phones, interviews. She hadn't been called again since her bail hearing. Her mother hadn't been allowed to speak with her. No one had said a word to her since the courtroom door slammed shut behind her. Until now. The guard returned with a clipboard in hand and a new tone in his voice. Less robotic, almost wary. "Carter," she looked up. "You've got a lawyer. Says she's here pro bono. Asked for you specifically." Imani blinked. I didn't request anyone." "She requested you," he said, and opened the door. They led her to a small, cramped interview room. The table was metal. 2 plastic chairs faced each other like reluctant opponents. On the far side sat a woman with deep brown skin, cropped natural hair, and a suit so sharply tailored it looked like it could cut through lies on sight. She stood the moment Imani entered, and her presence filled the space with an immediate calm. Not soft, but deliberate. Anchoring. "Nina Lambert," she said, extending a hand. "I'm your attorney." Imani hesitated, then took the hand. Firm grip, warm. "I didn't know anyone was coming." "You will," Nina said. "You're not invisible, not anymore." Imani sat, slowly, carefully, like trust was a fragile thing she didn't know how to hold. Nina opened a black leather folder and pulled out a notepad. Her pen clicked with purpose. "Let's start at the beginning," she said. "And I mean your beginning, not theirs." Imani stared at her. "You're not here to plead out. You're here to win," Nina continued. "And I can't help you unless I know everything. So go ahead, from the top. No edits, no apologies." Something in Imani's chest tightened, not with fear, with unfamiliar permission. She took a breath, then she began. From the skincare aisle, the store lights, the crowd, Brent's voice, her bag being emptied like trash, the cold hallway, the back room, the camera, the lie, the cuffs, the phone she wasn't allowed to touch, the sun bleeding across the parking lot as they walked her past strangers' eyes. She spoke in full sentences at first, then fragments, then silences between memories that pressed against her throat like hands. Nina didn't interrupt, didn't write, just watched, listened. When Imani finished, her voice hoarse and raw, she realized her hands were clenched into fists on the table. She let go slowly, her fingers aching from the tension she hadn't even noticed building. Nina nodded once, then reached into her folder and pulled out a printout. "This is from Twitter," she said, sliding the paper across the table. Imani leaned in. It was a still frame from a video, her face stunned, framed between two officers outside the store. Behind her, the store logo. In the foreground, a bystander's hand holding a phone. Captioned, "She kept saying she didn't steal anything. They cuffed her anyway. Share this." Imani stared at it. "This video's been viewed over 80,000 times in 48 hours, Nina said. "You've got people asking questions. That's leverage, and I plan to use every ounce of it." "I didn't even know it was out there," Imani whispered. "That's the thing about truth," Nina said. "It doesn't need permission to spread." She opened another file. "I've already subpoenaed the store's surveillance footage. We'll have it by Monday. I'm filing a motion to reduce your bail and a complaint for wrongful arrest. Also looking into Brent Callahan, your store manager. Turns out this isn't the first time he's made someone fit the profile." Imani blinked. "You're doing all of that? For me? For you? For every black girl who got dragged out of somewhere she belonged?" Silence filled the space, heavy with something sacred. Imani sat back, her body still trembling slightly. But the tremble had changed. It was no longer fear. It was movement. "What do I do next?" she asked. "You get ready," Nina said. "Because when we go back into that courtroom, you're not standing alone." She pushed the folder forward. "And you're going to tell your story, not as a victim, as a witness, to the system, to the pattern, to the truth." Imani stared at the folder. Her name was printed on the tab in clean block letters. Not subject, not suspect, just her name. For the first time since this nightmare began, she believed she might come out the other side. Not just free, but seen. The courtroom felt different this time. Not because it had changed, but because Imani had. She stood straighter in the hallway as she waited for the bailiff to call her in, her wrists unchained for the first time in days. Nina stood beside her, heels planted like stakes, binder under one arm, calm carved into every movement. Imani's sundress had been replaced with a plain navy blouse and slacks her mother had brought from home. She'd braided her hair the night before, tight, clean lines down the back of her scalp, because Nina had told her, "Control what they can't question." Inside the courtroom, the benches were fuller than before. A few reporters, a few regulars who floated between hearings like ghosts of the system. And seated near the back, as always, was Maya Carter, Imani's mother, dressed in silence and worry. The court clerk called the case. People via Imani Carter. Defense is present. Prosecution is present. Judge Ellison presiding. Imani took her seat beside Nina, who nodded at her once, crisp and composed. Then the judge entered. All rise. They stood, sat. The game began. The prosecutor, Daniel Frost, strode forward like a man who'd memorized every line of his own script. He was smooth, unctuous, the kind of man who smiled at jurors as if already apologizing for how long this would take. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, hands clasped lightly before him, "this is a case about honesty, about integrity, about trust in the institutions designed to keep commerce and communities safe." The store in question followed standard protocol. They observed suspicious behavior. They acted accordingly. That the defendant is articulate, that she is young, that she is a student. None of this erases what the evidence shows. He gestured to the screen behind him. Today, you'll hear from the store manager, from responding officers, and from those who witnessed the events firsthand. And by the end, you will see that this was not about race, nor class, but about choices. Nina didn't blink. When it was her turn, she stood without preamble. No flourish, no fake warmth. "This is a case about perception," she said, "but not Imani's perception. Theirs." She pointed toward the prosecution's table. "It's about who we believe when they say, 'I didn't do it,' who we choose to protect, who we allow to be innocent without proof. It's about a system that acts first and watches the footage later. A system that assumed guilt the moment a black girl picked up a concealer and put it back." She let the words hang. Then she turned and took her seat. The judge nodded. "Prosecution, call your first witness." Brent Callahan entered from a side door, shoulders back, eyes avoiding Imani's. He was dressed in a sleek gray suit, the department store logo pinned like a badge to his lapel. He took the stand, swore the oath, and settled into his seat with a well-practiced exhale. "Mr. Callahan," Frost said, "walk us through the events of that day." Brent nodded. "I noticed the defendant browsing in the cosmetics aisle. She looked nervous, kept glancing around, held a product close, and then her bag shifted." "Did you witness her place the item in the bag?" "I saw what I saw," Brent replied. "Did she resist when approached?" "She denied everything, got defensive, refused to show her belongings at first." Frost nodded solemnly. "Thank you." Nina stood. "Mr. Callahan," she said, flipping open a folder, "how many customers shop in your store on an average day?" "Hundreds." "How many touch products without buying them?" Well, most, I suppose." "Do you detain most of them?" "No, only when there's cause." "What cause did you have?" "I told you. She looked nervous. Her bag moved." Nina approached the stand slowly. "Did you ask her if she needed help?" "No." "Did she raise her voice?" "No." "Did she attempt to leave the store?" "No." "Did she tell you she hadn't stolen anything?" "Yes." "Did you check the footage before or after you called the police?" Brent hesitated. "I was told security had seen it." "That's not what I asked." He shifted in his seat. "After." Nina turned to the jury. "So to clarify, a young woman picked up a product, put it back, was approached without cause, had her personal belongings searched publicly, was detained in a back room, and the footage exonerating her wasn't reviewed until after she'd been humiliated in front of strangers?" Brent's face flushed. "That's not what happened." "Are you saying the footage is inaccurate?" "I'm saying, did you apologize?" Silence. Nina stepped back. "No further questions." The judge cleared his throat. "Call your next witness." A beat of surprise followed when the defense stood instead. "Your Honor," Nina said, "the defense would like to call Ms. Rachel Green." a tall, pale woman in her late 30s stood and walked slowly to the stand. She wore a blazer over jeans, nervous fingers laced in her lap. She was sworn in. "Ms. Green," Nina asked, "were you present at the Capitol View department store on the afternoon of June 12th? "Yes." "Did you witness the incident involving my client?" "I did." "Can you describe what you saw?" Rachel swallowed. "I was in the same aisle. I saw her, Imani, pick up a concealer, check the label, then put it back. That's all. She didn't steal anything. I remember because she smiled at me when I asked her if the shade matched my tone better than hers. She laughed. Then she moved on. Did anyone ask for your statement that day?" "No." "Did you try to give one?" "Yes. A guard told me it wasn't necessary." Nina nodded. "Thank you." Frost tried to discredit her, suggested she was mistaken, that perhaps Imani had done something subtle, something hard to see. But Rachel didn't budge. She repeated herself every time. She didn't steal anything. And in the silence that followed, something in the courtroom shifted. Not the whole weight of injustice, but enough. Imani sat still. Her chest burned, not with fear, but with something sharp and alive. Vindication wasn't here yet, but doubt had entered the room. And in a courtroom built to silence women like her, doubt was an opening. The judge called for a recess. Nina leaned in as the courtroom emptied. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "you speak." And Imani, voice steady, replied, "I'm ready." The courtroom was hushed when Imani took the stand. No coughs, no papers rustling, just the slow creak of the wooden floor beneath her shoes and the sound of her breath, tight but even, as she approached the witness chair. Her palms were dry, her spine tall, and as the clerk swore her in, she felt the words settle not just into the room, but into her bones. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." She sat. The lights above felt warmer than the ones in lockup. She could smell the faint scent of coffee from someone's travel mug in the gallery, and the distant cologne of the court clerk. The little details grounded her, reminded her that she was not an exhibit, not a subject. She was here to speak. Nina stood at the defense table. Her tone, when she spoke, was softer than it had been all trial. Not a performance, a gesture. "Imani," she said, "tell us what happened, in your words." And for the first time, no one interrupted her. She started at the beginning, the store, the concealer, the shelf. She described the moment Brent Callahan appeared beside her, how his voice didn't rise so much as spread, soaking through the air with condescension and certainty. She talked about the humiliation of being surrounded, how her belongings had been spilled out like garbage, how her voice had been dismissed as noise. "I kept thinking," she said, eyes fixed on the jurors, "that if I just stayed calm, if I didn't raise my voice, if I followed the rules, then they would see I wasn't who they thought I was. But they never saw me at all. Not really." Her voice didn't break, but it bent just once. "I did everything I was supposed to do. I asked to call my mom. I offered my ID. I let them take me without fighting. And still, I ended up in a cell. Still, I'm here having to explain why I deserve to be treated like a human being." She let the silence afterwards stretch long, not to dramatize it, but because it was honest. Nina gave her a small nod. No further questions. Prosecutor Frost stood slowly, his hands clasped behind his back like a man approaching a delicate piano. "Ms. Carter," he said, "how often do you shop at Capitol View?" "Often," she said. "It's near my campus." "Have you ever been stopped before?" No. But you're aware of shoplifting statistics, correct? I'm aware of being followed in stores more than once, she answered, voice crisp. He tilted his head. So you were used to that kind of scrutiny? I was used to injustice, she corrected. A flicker of surprise passed through him. He tried again, this time circling back to her reaction. You were calm, you say. You didn't raise your voice. I didn't have to, she said. He already believed what he wanted. Frost paused. No more questions. Nina stood once more, this time to deliver her closing. She walked to the center of the courtroom and placed both palms on the railing in front of the jury box. No one watched that footage and saw a thief, she began. What they saw was a woman who was presumed guilty before she even entered the store. A woman who was accused, detained, arrested, and denied dignity. Not because of what she did, but because of what she looked like. She gestured to Imani, who sat still, eyes steady. If justice means anything, it must mean this: that we do not turn our fear into handcuffs, that we do not allow humiliation to become policy, that we do not silence truth with routine. She paused. They didn't roll back the footage because they were certain she was guilty. They rolled it back because the world was watching. But I ask you, what if it hadn't been? What would have happened then? She let that question hang like a verdict of its own. Thank you. The jury deliberated for 97 minutes. Imani didn't speak during that time. She sat in a quiet corner of the hallway with her mother, hands clasped together like an anchor. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. When the bailiff finally opened the courtroom doors again, the air inside felt heavy with anticipation. Frost sat stiffly. Brent Callahan was in the second row, his suit jacket rumpled now, lips pressed tight. The judge returned. The jury filed in. A clerk read the verdict. On the charge of petty theft, not guilty. On the charge of obstruction, not guilty. Imani didn't exhale. Not yet. The judge cleared his throat. Miss Carter, you are free to go. Now. Now she breathed. Brent stood as if to object, but a court officer approached him before he could speak. A murmur swept through the gallery as someone whispered, "That's the guy from the video, right?" It spread quickly, whispers turning into murmurs, turning into motion. Outside the courtroom, the sky was pale blue, soft with early afternoon light. Reporters clustered near the steps. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted her name. Imani didn't stop. She walked forward, her mother beside her, Nina close behind. The city buzzed around them. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Near the base of the courthouse steps, she saw them. A group of young black girls, no older than 13, standing quietly in a row. Their eyes wide, their hands holding phones, their faces shining with something rare and electric. Recognition. Imani paused, met their eyes, and nodded once. Not a wave, not a performance, just a signal. I see you, and I'm still standing. 3 months had passed since the verdict. The leaves had turned gold and brittle, drifting in slow spirals outside Imani's window as she sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her apartment was quiet, sunlight spilling onto the hardwood floors, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her, and a Word document open, cursor blinking like a slow, steady heartbeat. The essay was nearly done. It had taken weeks to write. Not because the words were hard to find, but because shaping them into something the world couldn't look away from required more than just recounting. It required precision. It required truth. And it required her to bleed a little more, this time on her own terms. The headline she had typed in bold, "I was accused, arrested, and humiliated. Here's what the camera didn't show. In it, she had written about the quiet violence of being silenced, the ache of hearing her name twisted by strangers online, the bitter taste of being pitied by people who didn't listen until her face went viral. But she also wrote about resilience, not the kind that's made for inspiration quotes, but the kind built from long nights in a cell, from holding her mother's hand in court, from standing in front of a jury who couldn't unsee the footage, no matter how hard they tried. The essay would go live that evening on a major platform. Nina had helped secure the publishing deal, pro bono like everything else. The title alone had already stirred conversation among the editorial staff. But Imani wasn't looking for praise. She was planting truth, and truth didn't always bloom in applause. Sometimes it bloomed in silence, in discomfort, in confrontation. She leaned back and closed her laptop. Outside, the day was quiet, crisp. She pulled on a jacket and left the apartment, walked down the block toward the park where she was scheduled to speak, her first public event since the trial. It wasn't a national summit or a press conference. It was a community program. A local high school had invited her to speak during Justice Week, a modest auditorium filled with students still young enough to believe the system could be changed and still old enough to know that it probably wouldn't, unless they did it themselves. The speech was short. She told them the facts, what had happened, what was lost, what was never proven but felt anyway. She told them the truth. She told them that even when the footage cleared her name, some people still called her lucky. Lucky, she said slowly, is not the word I would use for being believed only after a camera told my story better than I could. The students didn't cheer. They didn't clap loudly. They sat still, listening. And she realized that was all she'd ever wanted. Afterward, a girl approached her. Dark skin, bright eyes, hair in tight coils that bounced when she walked. She didn't ask for a photo. She didn't even say hello at first. She just looked at Imani and said, "I think about you every time I walk into a store." Imani nodded. Then I didn't go through it for nothing. Later that afternoon, she met her mother at the park's east edge, near a small memorial garden maintained by volunteers. They knelt side by side in the dirt, planting a young dogwood tree, a gift from the neighborhood association. It wasn't fancy, just a sapling with thin, hopeful branches, supported by twine and quiet hands. They worked mostly in silence. At one point, Maya paused and looked over at her daughter. "You're not just surviving anymore," she said. "No," Imani replied. "I'm not." She tied the last knot around the wooden stake. The tree stood, trembling slightly in the wind, but upright. Later that night, she posted the essay. She didn't tag anyone. She didn't ask for shares. She didn't check the comments. She just ended it with one line. "If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. Not for me. For every girl who didn't get her footage rolled back in time." And then she closed the laptop and let the silence speak for itself.